Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly lecture videos. Our these week's topics are short-term financial planning and working capital management. And we're covering two chapters this week, chapter 16 and chapter 17. So let's start with chapter 16, short-term financial plan. So as usual, we have few learning objectives in this chapter. We will learn about uh, operating and cash cycle, different types of short-term financial policy and components of financial planning. So in this video, I will be mostly talking about net working capital and operating and cash cycle. I will be uploading 2 more videos to discuss the other 2 learning objectives. So first of all, we examine the components of cash and net working capital as they change from one year to the next. We have learned different aspects of these in chapter 2 and 3, but we review some of those discussions. First of all, I think all of you remember that current assets are cash and other assets that are expected to convert to cash within the year. And current assets are presented in the balance sheet on the basis of their liquidity. That means there is with which they can be converted to cash and the time it takes to convert. So the examples of current assets are cash, cash equivalents, marketable securities, account receivables, and inventories. You also may recall about current liabilities, are the liabilities where obligations need to be repaid within a year. And the common current liabilities are accounts payables, expense payables, notes payables, bills payables, etc. Okay, so because we want to focus on changes in cash, we start by defining cash in terms of the other elements of statement of financial position. Okay, so the basic statement of financial position can be written as this. So you can say that net working capital plus non-current assets equals to non-current debt and equity, and net working capital is cash and other current asset, as we explained already, minus current liability. So if this net working capital definition is substituted here, then we can define cash as this. So cash equals to non-current debt plus equity plus other current asset minus equity plus current asset minus current asset other than cash and non-current assets. So this equation essentially tells us in general that some activities naturally increase cash and some activities decrease it. Okay, so we can list them as this. So you can see here the activities that increase cash and activities that decrease cash. Okay, so activities that increase cash, for example, increasing non-current debt like borrowing for more than a year, increasing equity, for example, selling some shares, increasing liabilities, for example, borrowing some short-term loan, decreasing current assets, for example, selling of inventory, and decreasing non-current asset, for example, selling some property. Activities that decrease cash are decreasing non-current debt, for example, paying off a long-term loan, decreasing equity, for example, repurchasing some shares, decreasing current asset, for example, paying off a short-term loan, and increasing current assets, for example, buying some inventory, and increasing non-current assets like buying some property. Okay, so you see that these lists are completely opposite. So activities that increase cash are called sources of cash, and activities that decrease cash are called uses of cash. Okay, and you may have noticed that sources of cash, I'm talking about these sources of cash, increase in a liability or decrease in an asset, and they are essentially cash inflow. Right. So when you increase liability, so for example, borrowing, cash comes in, or decrease an asset, for example, you sell assets, so cash comes in. So the sources of assets are essentially sources of cash are essentially cash inflows, Uses, on the other hand, are reverse. So a use essentially is a cash involves decreasing a liability, for example, paying it off, or increasing an asset, for example, buying. So they are essentially cash outflows. Okay. Now, the primary concerns in short-term finance are the firm's short-term operating and financing activities. For a typical manufacturing firm, these short-term activities may consist of a sequence of events. For example, buying raw materials, buying raw material for production, paying cash for this raw material, then manufacturing the product, then selling the product, and collecting cash. Okay, so these are some sequential events. And these activities create pattern of cash inflows and cash outflows. And these cash flows are unsynchronized and uncertain. Unsynchronized because they do not occur at the same point in time, and uncertain because future cash flows cannot be precisely predicted, right? To understand this operating and cash cycle, first of all, let's start with a simple case. Let's say that one day in day 0, you purchase $1,000 worth of inventory. So you are in day 0, and you pay for this inventory after 30 days. Okay. And you take another 30 days where someone buys from you, okay, the finished goods, and they pay in another 45 days. Okay, so which means that from day 0, after 30 days, you pay for your raw material purchase. After 60 days, you sell. And after another 45 days, you collect. So which means that 30 days, from 0 to 30 days, you need to pay. And from 30 to 105 days when you collect. Okay. So these are the number of days. Now, several things are noticeable from this. First of all, is the entire process takes 105 days. 0 to 30 days you pay for inventory, 60 days you sell inventory, and after 105 days you collect. This whole process takes 105 days. This is called operating cycle. Okay. So the operating cycle essentially is the length of time it takes to acquire inventory, sell it, and collect the payment. Okay, collect the payment, and this has two distinct components. One is the inventory period, another is the account receivable period. So what is the inventory period? I said that you buy the raw material today, and after 60 days you sell. Right, this 60-day period is called inventory period. Okay, and when you sell, and you take another 45 days to collect, right? So that is called account receivable period. Okay, so which means that if I go back to our previous slide, which means that operating cycle equals to inventory period. From the inventory period is from the day you buy raw material and you sell your finished goods, and account receivable is from the sale of your finished goods to the collection. Okay, so that is operating cycle. The second thing from the example that I gave you is that the cash flow. Okay. And the cash flows are not synchronized. Okay, not synchronized because you buy raw material and you pay after 30 days. So that is called accounts payable period. Okay, and this operating cycle minus accounts payable period, that is actually your cash cycle. Okay, so cash cycle therefore is the number of days that pass until we collect the cash from the sale. Okay, so from the sale and measured from when we actually pay for the inventory. Or in other words, we can say cash cycle is the length of time between you pay your payables to you collect your receivables. Okay. Now let's talk about this figure a little bit. So this figure depicts the short-term operating activities and cash flow for a typical manufacturing firm. Okay, by looking at this timeline. So by looking at this cash flow timeline, you can see that it's made up of operating cycle. Okay, you can see this is your operating cycle. So your operating cycle is made up of your inventory period and account receivable period. Okay. However, from day 0, you pay your accounts payable here, but you collect your cash here, and where comes your short-term financial management comes here. So you need to pay, and after some time you collect. So how you manage your short-term assets and liabilities during this time is actually is the concern of financial management. Before we examine the operating and cash cycle a bit more detail in the next 2 slides, it is useful to look at the people involved in managing a firm's current assets and current liabilities. Okay, so from this table, you can see that short-term financial management in large corporation involves a number of different financial and non-financial managers. You can see, for example, selling or credit. Selling on credit involves at least 3 different individuals. For example, the credit manager, and the marketing manager, and the accountant, right? Now, of these 3, only 2 are responsible to the chief financial officer. Okay, so those are credit manager and accountant. The marketing function is usually with the marketing department. Thus, there is a potential conflict, particularly if different managers concentrate on only part of the picture. Okay, for example, if marketing is trying to land a new account, it may seek more liberal credit terms as an inducement. However, this may increase the firm's investment in receivable or its exposure to bad debt risk, and conflict can result in. Now we will see a simple example on how to calculate operating and cash cycle. So to calculate operating and cash cycle, we first of all need some balance sheet information. For example, you can see inventory beginning, ending, and average, and also some income statement information, for example, revenues and cost of sales. So first of all, our inventory turnover. Inventory turnover is cost of sales. Okay. You can see the cost of sales, which is 8.2 million divided by average inventory, and it is 3.8 times. Okay, so which means that inventory is turned over 3.8 times a year, and which means that each turnover takes 111 days. Okay, so which means that our inventory from the purchase of our raw material to the sale of our finished good, it takes about 111 days. Okay, so our inventory sits in our stock for 111 days. And you can see that receivable turnover is credit sales divided by average account receivable. So that is 6.39 times, and receivable period is 57 days. Okay, so which means from the sale of our finished goods to the collection of our receivables, that takes 57 days, which means that our receivables remain uncollected for 57 days. Okay, and payable turnover is cost of sales divided by average payables. That means from buying raw material on credit to the payment. This process occurs 9.4 times in a year, and that's 39 days, which means that we have 39 days to pay our payables. Okay, and operating cycle is the sum of receivable period and inventory period, and as we deduct accounts payable, that is cash cycle, which is 129 days. So which means that 129 days is the length of time between the payment of payables and the collection of receivables. Okay, so this is the end of our discussion on the operating cycle and cash cycle. Thank you very much.